Let me take you back to the early days of aviation history, where the story of the P-51 Mustang begins. This iconic American fighter aircraft, renowned for its long-range capabilities, played a pivotal role during World War II and the Korean War. It all started in April 1940 when North American Aviation, led by James H. Kindleberger, responded to a call from the British Purchasing Commission. Instead of producing the outdated Curtiss P-40 fighters for the Royal Air Force, RAF, Kindleberger's team proposed a fresh, more advanced design, the Mustang. By September 9, 1940, just 102 days after the contract was inked, the first prototype, the NA-73X, was ready. It took to the skies for the first time on October 26, 1940. Initially powered by the Allison V1710 engine, the Mustang faced limitations at high altitudes due to the absence of a sophisticated supercharger. However, its operational debut with the RAF as the Mustang Mk proved its tactical prowess. In mid-1942, a game-changing modification came when Rolls-Royce equipped the Mustang with a Merlin 65 engine, featuring a two-stage intercooled supercharger. This upgrade, tested rigorously at Hucknall, significantly enhanced the aircraft's high-altitude performance without compromising its range. The impressive results led to the development of the P-51B/C models, also known as the Mustang Mk3, which could finally match the Luftwaffe's fighters in long-range missions. The ultimate version, the P-51D, was powered by the Packard V1657 engine, a licensed version of the Merlin 66. Armed with 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, the P-51D became a formidable force. From late 1943, P-51Bs and Cs, followed by P-51DS from mid-1944, escorted bombers on raids over Germany, ensuring Allied air superiority. These Mustangs were also instrumental in the North African, Mediterranean, Italian, and Pacific theaters, with their pilots claiming nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft by the end of the war. When the Korean War erupted, the Mustang, now designated F-51, initially served as the United States' primary fighter until replaced by jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre. Nevertheless, the Mustang transitioned to a specialized fighter-bomber role and remained in service with various air forces until the early 1980s. Post-war, the Mustang found a new life as a beloved civilian warbird and air racing champion, cementing its legacy in aviation history. Design and development. In 1938, the British government set up a purchasing commission in the United States, led by Sir Henry Self. His responsibilities included overseeing RAF production, research, and development, and he collaborated with Sir Wilfrid Freeman, the Air Member for Development and Production. Self's role also extended to the British Air Council Subcommittee on Supply, where he was tasked with organizing the production and supply of American fighter aircraft for the RAF. At the time, options were limited, as no American planes met European standards, with the Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk being the closest fit. However, the Curtiss-Wright plant was already at full capacity, making P-40 scarce. North American Aviation, NAA, which had been supplying T-6 Texan trainers, known as Harvards in Britain, to the RAF, had capacity to take on more work. NA President Dutch Kindleberger proposed a new medium bomber, the B-25 Mitchell, to Self. Instead, Self asked if NA could produce P-40s under license from Curtiss. Kindleberger countered that NA could develop a better aircraft using the same Allison V1710 engine faster than setting up a P-40 production line. From January to April 1940, John Atwood of NA worked closely with British engineers in New York, discussing and drawing up concepts for the new aircraft. Self, wary of NA's lack of experience with fighter design, insisted they study Curtiss P-40 wind tunnel tests and drawings. NA purchased the necessary data from Curtiss for £56,000 and used it to create detailed design drawings. The British Purchasing Commission approved these designs, leading to the formal start of the Mustang project on May 4, 1940, with an order for 320 aircraft finalized on May 29, 1940. Curtiss engineers accused NA of copying their designs. The commission required the Mustang to be armed with 4.303 in machine guns, cost no more than $40,000 per unit, and have the first production aircraft delivered by January 1941. The design team, led by Edgar Schmude, included innovative features like laminar flow airfoils and a new cooling system that reduced drag. They tested these features in wind tunnels, confirming their effectiveness. The prototype, NA-73X, was rolled out in September 1940, just 102 days after the order, and it first flew on October 26, 1940. The aircraft, flown by test pilot Vance Breeze, handled well and had a significant fuel capacity. It featured a semi-monocoque aluminum fuselage, armed with 4.30 caliber and 2.50 caliber Browning machine guns. Although the USIC could block sales deemed detrimental to U.S. interests, they allowed the Mustang project to proceed due to its British origins. In September 1940, another 300 Na-73s were ordered. The Mustang I had limitations at high altitudes due to its Allison engine's single-stage supercharger. In 1941, Rolls-Royce suggested fitting the Mustang with a Merlin 61 engine, which had superior high-altitude performance. Despite initial resistance, extensive development and collaboration led to the Merlin-powered Mustang becoming a reality. NA representatives, including Schmude, visited the UK to discuss the project. This led to the creation of two prototypes, initially designated XB78 and later XB51B. The Merlin-powered Mustang demonstrated exceptional performance, leading to an initial contract for 400 aircraft in August 1942, even before the first flight in November 1942. Production of the P-51B began in June 1943, with deliveries to the 8th and 9th Air Forces starting in late 1943. The new design required adjustments, such as moving the wing forward and adding an internal fuel tank to increase range. These improvements made the P-51B a critical asset in achieving air superiority in the European theater during World War II. United Kingdom Operational Service. The story of the Mustang and the Royal Air Force, RAF, begins with its development specifically for British needs. The first Mustangs, known as Na-73s and later Na-83s, were not designated as P-51s initially because they were built to meet British specifications. The RAF called these aircraft Mustang Mark I. The initial order consisted of 320 Na-73s, followed by 300 Na-83s. Under the Lend-Lease program, the first 93 Mustang Mk-IAs were labeled P-51s by the USAF, with 50 P-51s later designated as Mustang Mk-2s. However, the British Aircraft Purchasing Commission had already signed the first contract for these aircraft on April 24, 1940, before Lend-Lease came into effect, under the Cash and Carry program due to the U.S. Neutrality Acts. The initial batch of Mustangs arrived in the UK in October 1941, and the first squadron, number 26 Squadron RAF, began operations in January 1942. Due to their limited high-altitude performance, these Mustangs were assigned to Army Cooperation Command for tactical reconnaissance and ground attack instead of fighter command. On May 10, 1942, Mustangs conducted their first flight over France near Berck-sur-Mer. By July 27, 1942, 16 RAF Mustangs had undertaken their first long-range reconnaissance mission over Germany. They played a crucial role during the Dieppe raid on August 19, 1942, where British and Canadian Mustang squadrons provided air cover for the ground assault. In the following years, Mustangs were instrumental in targeting V-1 flying bomb sites. The last of the RAF's Mustang Mk-I and Mk-2 aircraft were retired in 1945. Army Cooperation Command leveraged the Mustang's superior speed and range for low-altitude rhubarb raids over Europe, often penetrating German airspace. The Mustang's V1710 engine performed smoothly at lower RPMs, allowing long flights over water at altitudes as low as 50 feet before reaching enemy territory. Over land, the Mustangs flew in a zigzag pattern to avoid enemy interception. These raids were highly effective. Within the first 18 months, Mustang Mk-IAs and Mk-IAs destroyed or heavily damaged 200 locomotives, over 200 canal barges, and numerous grounded enemy aircraft, at the cost of just 8 Mustangs. The aircraft could outpace any enemy fighters encountered at sea level. Enhancements like removing the engine's manifold pressure regulator allowed overboosting, significantly increasing engine power to 1,780 horsepower at 70 inches of mercury, compared to the approved 1,570 horsepower at 60 inches by Allison. The RAF also received 308 P-51Bs and 636 P-51Cs, designated as Mustang Mk-IAs, starting in late 1943 and early 1944. These aircraft remained operational until the war's end, though many units transitioned to the Mustang Mk-4, P-51D, and Mk-IVA, P-51K, totaling 828 aircraft. By the end of World War II, most Mustangs obtained under Lend-Lease were either returned to the USAF or scrapped by the RAF. The last RAF Mustangs were retired in 1947, marking the end of an era for this legendary aircraft in British service. U.S. Operational Service. Before the war, military doctrine centered around the belief that the bomber will always get through. This idea held that bombers, flying in tight formations, would possess enough firepower to protect themselves from enemy fighters. Despite the RAF and Luftwaffe's experiences with daylight bombing, the USAF clung to this theory in 1942. They believed that the sheer volume of defensive fire from bombers would deter or destroy attacking fighters, making fighter escorts a secondary concern. When the topic of fighter escorts did come up in 1941, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning was seen as a suitable choice due to its speed and range. However, another faction proposed converting strategic bombers into heavily armed gunships to provide the necessary defense. The idea of a single-engine, high-speed fighter with bomber-like range was dismissed as an engineering impossibility at the time. 8th Air Force Bomber Operations 1942-1943. The 8th Air Force began its operations from Britain in August 1942. Initially, the limited scale of these operations didn't provide clear evidence that the American doctrine of self-defending bombers was flawed. In the 26 missions flown by the end of 1942, the loss rate remained below 2%. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, the Allies developed the Combined Bomber Offensive (CBO) strategy, which aimed for continuous bombing operations, USAF conducting daytime raids to complement the RAF's nighttime attacks on industrial targets. By June 1943, the Combined Chiefs of Staff issued the Pointblank Directive, targeting the Luftwaffe's capabilities in preparation for the planned invasion of Europe. At this time, German fighter resources were primarily focused on the Eastern Front and other remote areas. Initially, the 8th Air Force encountered minimal and disorganized resistance, but as their missions continued, the Luftwaffe shifted more aircraft to the west and improved their defensive tactics. In the fall of 1943, the 8th Air Force launched a series of deep penetration raids into Germany, which were beyond the range of their escort fighters. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission in August resulted in the loss of 60 B-17s out of 376, and the attack on October 14 saw 77 B-17s lost from a force of 291, a staggering 26% loss rate. These heavy losses question the viability of the self-defending bomber concept. Rather than switching to nighttime bombing as the RAF suggested, the USAF explored other options. Initially, the idea was to use bombers converted into heavily armed gunships, like the Boeing YB-40, to escort formations. However, this concept proved ineffective. Attention then turned to escort fighters, particularly the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. By early 1943, the USAF also considered the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and the North American P-51B Mustang for escort roles. A July report highlighted the P-51B as the most promising, boasting an endurance of 4 hours and 45 minutes with a combination of internal and external fuel. In August 1943, modifications to the P-51B included an additional 85-gallon internal tank, but this caused stability issues. Despite some performance compromises, this extra tank was used during the initial stages of missions, and it was decided to equip all Mustangs destined for the 8th Fighter Command with this internal tank. This adjustment allowed the P-51 to provide effective escort for the bombers, significantly enhancing the success of the missions. P-51 Introduction. The P-51 Mustang emerged as the perfect solution to the urgent need for an effective bomber escort. It was powered by a reliable engine and had the capacity for a larger-than-average fuel load. Equipped with external fuel tanks, the Mustang could accompany bombers on their long journeys from England to Germany and back. By early 1944, during the Pointblank offensive, the operational strategy had evolved. Initially, bomber escorts were layered. Shorter-range P-38 Lightnings and P-47 Thunderbolts escorted bombers through the first stages of their missions, handing over to P-51 Mustangs for the remainder of the trip. This approach provided continuous coverage throughout the raid. The Mustang quickly proved its superiority over previous U.S. fighter designs, prompting the 8th Air Force to transition its fighter groups to Mustangs. The 8th Air Force swapped P-47 groups to the 9th Air Force in exchange for P-51 units and gradually converted its remaining Thunderbolt and Lightning groups. By the end of 1944, 14 out of 15 groups were flying Mustangs. The Luftwaffe's twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110 heavy fighters, brought in to counter the bombers, were easily outmatched by the Mustangs and quickly withdrawn from combat. The Focke-Wulf FW-190A, already struggling with poor high-altitude performance, was also outperformed by the Mustangs at the altitudes flown by B-17s. When loaded with heavy bomber hunting weapons, the FW-190A suffered significant losses. Although the Messerschmitt Bf 109 could match the Mustang at high altitudes, its lightweight airframe struggled with the increased armament needed for bomber interception. The Mustang, with its lighter, more focused armament, excelled in these engagements. In early 1944, Major General James Doolittle, the new commander of the 8th Air Force, allowed fighters more freedom to engage the Luftwaffe, instead of staying close to the bombers. This change aimed at achieving air supremacy. Mustang groups were sent ahead of the bombers to intercept German fighters. Although bomber crews initially complained about this tactic, by June, the strategy had paid off, and air supremacy was achieved. The Luftwaffe responded with the Gefechtsverband battle formation, which consisted of heavily armed and armored FW-190s escorted by two groups of Bf-109s to fend off the Mustangs. However, this large formation was slow to assemble and maneuver, making it vulnerable to the P-51's preemptive strikes. When German attacks did occur, they could be effective, with FW-190s pressing their assaults to within 100 yards of the bombers. The urgency to neutralize the Luftwaffe led to systematic strafing attacks on German airfields starting in late February 1944. These attacks intensified through the spring, aiming to secure air supremacy over Normandy. Some fighter groups were assigned specifically to airfield attacks, reducing the bomber escort role. The numerical superiority of USAF fighters, combined with the P-51's exceptional performance and skilled pilots, severely weakened the Luftwaffe's fighter force. By July 1944, the threat to US and British bombers was greatly diminished. The RAF, which had favored night bombing for safety, resumed daylight bombing in 1944 due to the reduced Luftwaffe threat. Hermann Göring, the Luftwaffe commander, famously remarked, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." Beyond Pointblank. On April 15, 1944, 8 Fighter Command launched Operation Jackpot, targeting Luftwaffe fighter airfields. As these missions grew more successful, the number of German fighters on their airfields dwindled, leading to a shift in targets. By May 21, the focus expanded to railways, locomotives, and other rolling stock used by the Germans for transporting materials and troops, in operations known as Chattanooga. The P-51 Mustang excelled in these missions, although losses were higher during strafing runs than in air-to-air combat. This was partly due to the vulnerability of the Mustang's liquid-cooled engine to small arms fire, unlike the air-cooled engines of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, which were also regularly assigned to ground strafing duties. The P-51D Mustang, like the Detroit Miss flown by Urban L. Drew of the 375th Fighter Squadron in autumn 1944, played a crucial role in maintaining Allied air superiority. Drew notably shot down 6 German aircraft, including 2 jet-powered Me-262s in a single mission. As the Allies maintained dominance, the Luftwaffe shifted its efforts to developing high-performance aircraft capable of evading Allied fighters and complicating bomber attacks due to their high speeds. These included the Messerschmitt Me-163B rocket interceptors and the Me-262A jet fighters. The Me-163B, which began operations with JG-400 in July 1944, proved more hazardous to its own pilots than to the Allies. The Me-262A, however, posed a significant threat. Nevertheless, attacks on their airfields neutralized much of this danger. The Me-262A's Junkers Jumo 004 jet engines required careful handling, making them especially vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Notably, Lieutenant Chuck Yeager of the 357th Fighter Group was among the first American pilots to down a Me-262, catching one on its landing approach. Similarly, on October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Urban L. Drew of the 361st Fighter Group shot down 2 Me-262s during their takeoff, and Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemk of the 479th Fighter Group believed he downed a Bf-109, which gun camera footage later suggested might have been a Me-262. On February 25, 1945, Mustangs from the 55th Fighter Group ambushed and destroyed 6 Me-262s as they took off. The P-51 also proved effective against V-1 flying bombs launched toward London. Using 150-octane fuel, P-51B/C Mustangs could catch these missiles, operating alongside shorter-range aircraft like the Supermarine Spitfire and Hawker Tempest. By May 8, 1945, the combined efforts of the 8th, 9th, and 15th Air Forces saw P-51 groups claim around 4,950 enemy aircraft shot down in air-to-air combat, about half of all USAF victories in the European theater, and 4,131 destroyed on the ground. The Mustangs' losses numbered approximately 2,520 aircraft. The 8th Air Force's 4th Fighter Group emerged as the top-scoring group in Europe, claiming 1,016 enemy aircraft destroyed, including 550 in aerial combat and 466 on the ground. In terms of air combat, the 357th Fighter Group of the 8th Air Force and the 354th Fighter Group of the 9th Air Force were the top P-51 units, with 565 and 664 air-to-air victories, respectively. The top Mustang ace was George Preddy of the USAF, who achieved 26.83 victories, 23 of them in the P-51. Tragically, Preddy was killed by friendly fire on Christmas Day 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. In China and the Pacific. In early 1945, the P-51C, D, and K variants were introduced to the Chinese Nationalist Air Force, enhancing their capability to strike Japanese targets in occupied China. These Mustangs were assigned to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Fighter Groups, quickly becoming the most formidable fighters in the region. Their primary opposition came from the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force's Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate. Although the P-51 Mustang was a latecomer to the Pacific theater, due to its crucial role in Europe, its deployment in the Far East began in late 1944. The P-38 Lightning, with its twin engines, had initially been favored for overwater flights. Once deployed, P-51s carried out close support, escort missions, and tactical photo reconnaissance. With the capture of Iwo Jima in early 1945, USAF P-51 Mustangs of the 7th Fighter Command were stationed there starting in March, primarily tasked with escorting B-29 Superfortress missions to Japan. The 7th Fighter Command's significant raid on May 29, 1945, targeted Yokohama, with 517 B-29s escorted by 101 P-51s. This raid encountered 150 A-6M0 fighters, leading to a fierce air battle. The P-51 pilots claimed 26 kills and 23 probables, with the loss of 3 Mustangs. Despite losing 5 B-29s and damaging another 175, the raid destroyed 6.9 square miles of Yokohama's business district, killing over 1,000 people. Throughout May, Allied air raids devastated 94 square miles of urban Japan, with the Minister of Home Affairs, Iwao Yamazaki, declaring civil defense efforts futile. On June 1, a major daylight raid on Osaka involved 521 B-29s escorted by 148 P-51s. Despite heavy cloud cover leading to 27 Mustang collisions, the bombers inflicted severe damage, killing 3,960 people and destroying 3.15 square miles of buildings. Further raids on June 5 and 7 targeted Kobe and Osaka, with significant destruction and minimal American losses. The campaign's first phase ended on June 15 with another devastating raid on Osaka and Amagasaki. By the end of June, Allied bombers had decimated much of Japan's 6 largest cities, resulting in immense casualties and homelessness, and significantly weakening Japan's defensive capabilities. The P-51s also proved effective against the V-1 flying bombs targeting London. Using 150-octane fuel, P-51B/C Mustangs could intercept these missiles, collaborating with shorter-range aircraft like the Supermarine Spitfire and Hawker Tempest. In addition to their escort duties, P-51s conducted independent ground attack missions against targets in Japan. The first such mission on April 16, 1945, saw 57 P-51s strafing Kanoya Airfield in Kyushu. Between April 26 and June 22, American fighter pilots claimed 64 Japanese aircraft destroyed on the ground and another 10 in the air. Despite these efforts, the results fell short of expectations, with USAF losses including 11 P-51s to enemy action and 7 to other causes. From July onwards, 7 Fighter Command focused solely on ground attack missions due to the lack of Japanese air opposition to the bombers. These raids targeted airfields to prevent Japanese aircraft from attacking the anticipated Allied invasion fleet. Though encounters with Japanese fighters were rare, the airfields were heavily defended by anti-aircraft batteries and barrage balloons. By war's end, 7 Fighter Command had executed 51 ground attack raids, claiming the destruction or damage of 1,062 aircraft and 254 ships, along with numerous buildings and railway stock. American losses totaled 91 pilots and 157 Mustangs. Medal of Honor recipients. 2 P-51 Mustang pilots were awarded the Medal of Honor during World War II for their extraordinary bravery in combat. Lieutenant Colonel James H. Howard. Lieutenant Colonel James H. Howard of the 356th Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group, received the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions during a bomber escort mission near Oschersleben, Germany, on January 11, 1944. Flying a P-51B Mustang, serial number 43-6315, nicknamed Ding Hao, Howard demonstrated remarkable courage and determination. Despite being heavily outnumbered by German fighters, he shot down 3 enemy planes. Even when his guns malfunctioned and his fuel supply ran dangerously low, he continued to defend the bombers, showing unwavering commitment to his mission and fellow airmen. Major William A. Shomo. Major William A. Shomo of the 82nd Reconnaissance Squadron, 71st Reconnaissance Group, was awarded the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary feat during a mission over Luzon, Philippines, on January 11, 1945. Piloting an F-6D, the armed photo reconnaissance variant of the P-51, serial number 44 to 14841, nicknamed Snooks V, Shomo achieved a remarkable ace in a day by shooting down 7 Japanese aircraft in a single mission. His actions not only exemplified his exceptional piloting skills but also his outstanding bravery under fire. These two pilots' valor and heroism in the P-51 Mustang underscore the critical role this aircraft played in achieving air superiority during World War II. After World War II. In the aftermath of World War II, the USAF consolidated its combat forces and selected the P-51 Mustang as its standard piston-engine fighter, phasing out the P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt or assigning them to reduced roles. With the introduction of advanced jet fighters like the P-80 and P-84, the P-51 was relegated to secondary duties. 1947 and Strategic Air Command. In 1947, the newly formed United States Air Force, USAF, employed Mustangs in the Strategic Air Command alongside F-6 Mustangs and F-82 twin Mustangs due to their impressive range. In 1948, the designation of the P-51 was changed to F-51, aligning with the new designation system that dropped the P for pursuit. Mustangs in service included the F-51B, F-51D, F-51K, RF-51D, RF-51K, and TRF-51D. They remained active from 1946 through 1951, but by 1950, most had been placed in storage or transferred to the Air Force Reserve and Air National Guard, ANG. Korean War. During the Korean War, the Mustang proved its worth again. Many stored or active F-51DS were shipped to the combat zone, used by the USAF, South African Air Force, and Republic of Korea Air Force, ROKOF, primarily for ground attack and photo reconnaissance. Their long range allowed them to attack targets in Korea from bases in Japan, unlike the short-ranged F-80 jets. However, the Mustang's liquid-cooled engines were vulnerable to ground fire, resulting in heavy losses. One notable incident was on August 5, 1950, when Major Louis J. Sabeel of the 67th Fighter Bomber Squadron attacked a North Korean armored column. Despite being heavily damaged and wounded, he continued his attack and ultimately crashed into the convoy, sacrificing his life. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Mustangs continued in service in Korea until 1953, when they were replaced by F-84s and Navy F-9F Panthers. The Royal Australian Air Force's 77 Squadron and the South African Air Force's 2 Squadron also used Mustangs during the war, with the latter transitioning to the F-86 Sabre by 1953. Post-Korean War and civilian market. The F-51s remained in the Air Force Reserve and ANG throughout the 1950s. The last USAF Mustang, F-51D-30 NA serial number 44 to 74936, was withdrawn from the West Virginia Air National Guard's 167th Fighter Interceptor Squadron in January 1957 and retired to the Air Force Central Museum. This aircraft, now painted as P-51D-15 NA serial number 44 to 15174, is displayed at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Many surplus Mustangs entered the civilian market, with the design rights purchased by Cavalier Aircraft Corporation. Cavalier marketed the Mustangs, and in 1967 and 1972, the USAF procured remanufactured Mustangs from Cavalier for the Military Assistance Program, MAP, destined for South American and Asian Air Forces. These aircraft had new V1657 engines, enhanced armament, and new serial numbers. Final military uses. The last U.S. military use of the F-51 was in 1968 when the U.S. Army employed a vintage F-51D for the Lockheed Ya-56 Cheyenne helicopter project. The Army ordered 2 F-51DS from Cavalier for use as chase planes at Fort Rucker. These aircraft were later used for various projects, including evaluation with a 106mm recoilless rifle. International service. The F-51 was adopted by numerous foreign air forces, remaining effective into the mid-1980s. The last Mustang downed in battle occurred during Operation Power Pack in the Dominican Republic in 1965, with the Dominican Air Force retiring the last operational Mustangs in 1984. Post-war surplus and civilian use. After World War II, many P-51 Mustangs were sold as surplus, often for as little as $1,500. These aircraft were bought by former wartime pilots, enthusiasts, and air racing aficionados. Some Mustangs were modified for air racing, becoming prominent competitors in various aviation events. One notable example is serial number 44 to 10947, a surplus P-51 C-10NT purchased by film stunt pilot Paul Mantz. Mantz modified the aircraft by sealing the wings to create large fuel tanks, known as wet wings, which reduced the need for fuel stops and eliminated the drag of drop tanks. Named Blaze of Noon after the film of the same name, this Mustang won the Bendix Air Races in 1946 and 1947, placed second in 1948, and third in 1949. In 1947, Mantz also set a U.S. coast-to-coast record with this aircraft. Later, he sold it to Charles F. Blair Jr., who renamed it Excalibur III. Blair used the Mustang to set a New York to London record in 1951 and flew from Norway to Alaska via the North Pole, proving navigation via sun sights over the magnetic North Pole. For this feat, Blair received the Harmon Trophy. This Mustang now resides in the National Air and Space Museum Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. Canadian Mustangs and civilian conversions. In 1958, the Royal Canadian Air Force, RCAF, retired its 78 remaining Mustangs. RCAF pilot Lynn Garrison ferried these aircraft to Canastota, New York, where they were sold to American buyers. These aircraft constitute a significant portion of the Mustangs still flying today. Trans-Florida Aviation, later known as Cavalier Aircraft Corporation, was the most prominent firm in converting Mustangs for civilian use. The Cavalier Mustang modifications included a taller tail fin and wingtip tanks, and some featured a tight second seat in place of the military radio and fuselage fuel tank. Military use of civilian conversions. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the U.S. Department of Defense contracted Cavalier to return some civilian conversions to updated military specifications for use in South America and Indonesia for close air support and counterinsurgency missions. Modern-day P-51 Mustangs. Today, P-51 Mustangs can fetch over $1 million, even for partially restored models. As of 2011, there were 204 privately owned P-51s registered with the FAA in the U.S., many of which are still operational and associated with groups like the Commemorative Air Force. Records and achievements. In May 2013, Doug Matthews set an altitude record of 42,568 feet in a P-51 named the Rebel for piston-powered aircraft weighing between 6,600 and 13,200 pounds. Matthews flew from a grass runway at Florida's Indiantown Airport and over Lake Okeechobee, setting world records for time to reach altitudes of 30,000 feet in 18 minutes and 39,000 feet in 31 minutes. He also achieved a level flight altitude of 40,100 feet and an absolute altitude of 42,500 feet, breaking the previous record set in 1954. The legacy of the P-51 Mustang is a testament to innovation, bravery, and the enduring spirit of aviation. From its heroic feats in World War II to its post-war contributions in civilian aviation, the Mustang continues to captivate enthusiasts around the world. If you enjoyed learning about the fascinating history of the P-51 Mustang, please like, share, and subscribe to the Animated General channel. Stay tuned for more captivating stories and historical insights. Thanks for watching, The Animated General. Out.